For 2 long years, the cat didn't so much as twitch a paw. Regal, the treasured feline of a reclusive billionaire, lay motionless in his private estate, a silent testament to every failed specialist's diagnosis. Veterinarians with Ivy League resumes had given up. Then one quiet afternoon, the maid, Amelia Brooks, gentle, observant, and quietly determined, held out her hand and, without warning, the cat rose. He took a step, then another, straight into her arms. For a fleeting moment, the entire world shifted. That wobbling step didn't just save the cat. It fractured the gilded facade of power and privilege, opening a door to secrets buried deep, in rooms no one dared to enter. By the time the owner realized what had happened, Amelia had already changed the course of everything. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Why would a man who could buy anything care so deeply about a single animal? For Alexander Whitmore, Regal was more than a cat. He was the last living connection to a life he refused to speak about, a life before the mansions and the headlines. People close to him said it was grief, others whispered it was guilt. But none could explain the iron hold this animal had over him. Every doctor, every therapist, every so-called expert had failed to coax Regal to move. Yet Amelia Brooks, with no formal training, had done it in less than 2 weeks. Was it chance, or had she seen something everyone else missed? And what if Regal's sudden steps weren't just a medical mystery, but a trigger, one that could unravel secrets worth more than Whitmore's fortune itself? Because in the days that followed, eyes began to turn toward Amelia, and doors long locked inside that sprawling estate began to creak open. Alexander Whitmore's name carried weight in boardrooms across continents. From Silicon Valley to Wall Street, his rise from a penniless college dropout to a tech magnate with global influence was the kind of story business magazines loved to print. In public, he was polished and charming, the kind of man who could turn a hostile crowd into an adoring one with a single speech. But behind the estate's white pillared facade, his warmth cooled into something controlled, calculating. He ruled his home the way he ruled his empire, with precision, with rules, and with an unspoken warning that mistakes were not tolerated. Regal, the rare imported cat he guarded like treasure, was the only living reminder of his late wife, Lillian. The animal had been a gift from her on his 50th birthday, a playful creature that once shadowed her through the halls. But after her death, Regal's legs weakened. No vet, no specialist, no exotic animal expert could explain why. The most celebrated animal neurologists in the world had walked away defeated, leaving Alexander with a beautiful but unmoving shadow of the cat he once knew. When Alana Brooks first arrived at the Whitmore mansion, it wasn't the opulence that caught her breath, though the scale of it was staggering. Vaulted ceilings dripping with crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors reflecting her every step, and manicured gardens stretching beyond what her eyes could take in. It was the silence, a kind of stillness that felt too deliberate, as if the very air had been taught not to disturb its master. She was in her late 30s, her quiet strength forged through years of putting others before herself. Her younger brother's mounting medical bills were the reason she had taken this job, and she intended to keep it. On that first morning, she was told her duties. Keep the private wing immaculate, serve meals when summoned, and under no circumstances attempt to touch the cat. She found Regal in his glass-walled enclosure, lying perfectly still on a velvet cushion, his emerald eyes following her every move. In that silent exchange, she sensed something. Loneliness, perhaps, or the kind of watchfulness born from long neglect. Days later, while delivering fresh linens to the East Wing, she passed an open door and caught Alexander's voice, low but urgent. "It has to stay buried. Do you understand? If those records surface, we lose everything." The reply was muffled, but the weight of the words rooted her in place. She moved on quickly, heart pounding, but the thought gnawed at her. That same day, she noticed a set of double doors at the far end of the corridor, guarded by an ornate brass lock. She would later learn this was the entrance to the locked wing, the one place in the mansion she had never seen Alexander enter, and the same wing where Regal's special enclosure was kept. Even then, she didn't know that within those walls, the lines between a man's love for his cat and the secrets of his empire were dangerously, irrevocably intertwined. From the very beginning, Alexander Whitmore's instructions were clear, and his tone left no room for interpretation. "You are never to touch Regal," he told Alana one morning, his eyes fixed on her with a sharpness that felt like a warning. "You may clean his space, you may leave his food, but you will not put your hands on him, ever." It wasn't just a rule. It was a command laced with something personal, almost protective to the point of obsession. Alana had no intention of defying it. She needed this job too badly, and besides, she understood boundaries. But every day she passed Regal's enclosure, she noticed the subtle ways the animal reacted, the way his ears twitched at the faintest sound of soft humming, the way his pupils widened when the late afternoon sun poured in through the glass, the slight, almost imperceptible lift of his head when she walked by, even if she didn't look his way. The mansion had seen the best. World-renowned animal therapists had flown in, each bringing promises and methods that carried hefty price tags. They spoke in confident tones, examined Regal under bright lights, and left with frustrated sighs and diplomatic excuses. The verdict was always the same. His condition was incurable. Alexander had watched them all fail, each failure adding another brick to the wall he kept between himself and hope. But Alana wasn't trying to fix him. She wasn't even thinking about it. She simply existed near him, moving slowly, speaking gently, and respecting his stillness. One crisp afternoon, the quiet of the East Wing was interrupted by the faint scrape of claws on tile. Alana turned her head and saw Regal closer to the edge of his enclosure than she had ever seen him before. His body trembled, his back legs unsteady, but his eyes, those sharp, green eyes, were locked on her. Without thinking, she knelt, her hand extending just far enough to bridge the space between them. For a breathless second, nothing happened. Then, with a small, tentative motion, Regal lifted one paw and placed it forward. Then another. The sound was barely audible, but in that silence it was deafening. He reached her hand, pressed his head against it, and let out a slow, rumbling purr. What neither of them realized in that moment was that the entire scene was unfolding on the security feed. Somewhere in another part of the mansion, Alexander Whitmore was watching. The next sound Alana heard was the heavy echo of footsteps against marble, fast and deliberate. He appeared in the doorway, his face unreadable, eyes darting from her to the cat and back again. He stepped forward, stopping just close enough for his shadow to fall over her. His voice was low, almost strangled, as if pulled from somewhere deep inside him. "How did you do that?" And before Alana could answer, the screen went black in her mind, as if the world had paused in that single impossible moment. Alexander Whitmore didn't sleep that night. The image of Regal moving, walking, would not leave him. But neither would the sight of Alana's hand reaching toward him. By morning, his disbelief had hardened into something else. Suspicion. He called in his head of security, a former federal investigator named Raymond Cole, and issued a simple but chilling order. "Find out everything there is to know about Alana Brooks. I want to know who she's been with, where she's been, what she's done, and what she wants." Within hours, quiet inquiries began. Former employers received calls. Old neighbors noticed unfamiliar cars idling at the end of their streets. Alana didn't know the full extent of the scrutiny yet, but she felt it. And then came the warning. Raymond passing her in the hallway, leaning close enough for her to catch the sharp scent of his cologne, and murmuring, "Stay in your lane, Miss Brooks. You don't want to wander where you don't belong." The problem for Alexander was that secrets had a way of seeping out, and Regal's sudden improvement was impossible to hide. A trusted staff member, perhaps without realizing the weight of the information, mentioned it to a friend. Within days, a whisper became a rumor, and the rumor reached a gossip columnist known for sniffing out stories in the city's wealthiest circles. Then came the calls, reporters, bloggers, even television producers, asking for Alana by name. They wanted an interview, a statement, anything about the miracle Maid and the billionaire's once crippled cat. Each time she refused. She didn't trust the attention, and something in her gut told her the story wasn't hers to tell. Not yet. But she could not shake her own growing curiosity. Why had Regal been immobile for so long? What had truly caused his sudden steps toward her? Late at night, when the estate was still, Alana began to search. She found the cat's veterinary files in the study, tucked away in a folder so thin it seemed almost too small to contain 2 years of treatment. The dates didn't match the stories Alexander had told the press. Reports from specialists were missing. One file from a foreign clinic made a cryptic note in the margin: mobility restricted, non-medical cause suspected. The phrase haunted her. Non-medical cause. She began to look at Regal differently, not as a victim of illness, but as a prisoner of something deliberate. And as the days passed, the cat's attachment to her grew unmistakable. He would rise when she entered, press himself against her leg, follow her shadow until she turned to acknowledge him. Across the room, Alexander watched this change with an intensity that made her skin prickle. It was no longer clear whether his gaze was fixed on her out of gratitude or fear of what she might uncover. It happened on a quiet afternoon when Alexander was away at a private meeting in the city. Alana had been brushing Regal in the sunlit corner of the enclosure when her fingers caught on something unusual in the lining of his collar. A thin seam that didn't belong. It wasn't decorative and it wasn't part of any tag. Her curiosity overpowered her caution. She eased the collar off and, beneath the soft leather, found a sliver of metal no bigger than her thumb. It wasn't a bell or a charm. It was a device, sealed tight, with the faintest etching of a serial code along its side. She didn't know exactly what it was, but she knew it wasn't meant for a cat. That night, she slipped into the small servants' quarters with the collar hidden under her jacket and borrowed her brother's old tablet. A few searches later, she realized what she was holding: a custom-built, encrypted data drive. And its design, she learned, was so specialized that only a handful of private tech firms in the world could have made it. Inside it, according to the specifications she uncovered, could be everything from bank account codes to legal documents. For the first time, she began to see Regal not just as a pet, but as a vault. When Alexander returned the next day, she waited until they were alone in the study. "Why?" she asked quietly, placing the collar on his desk. "Would your cat be wearing something like this?" His face, so often controlled and unreadable, faltered. It was only for a heartbeat, but she saw it, the flash of panic in his eyes before he masked it with a slow, measured exhale. "You don't know what you're talking about, Alana," he said, his voice sharp but strained. "That's a security tracker. Nothing more." But even as he spoke, his gaze kept flicking toward the collar, as though afraid she might take it again. Under her care, Regal no longer stayed still. He walked the length of the room, leapt onto furniture, followed her down the hall. Every step made the collar swing, made the device inside it easier to notice, harder to hide. Alexander began appearing more often, his presence a shadow at the edges of her routine. One evening, as she prepared to leave the library, he closed the door behind her and stepped closer. His words were low, almost a growl. "If you value your life, you'll forget you ever saw what's inside that collar." Then he walked past her without another word, leaving the warning hanging in the air like a noose she could suddenly feel tightening around her neck. Alana waited until Alexander was gone for one of his weekend retreats in the Hamptons before making her move. Regal had been following her more closely than ever, and when he curled into her lap that morning, she unfastened the collar with steady hands and slipped the device into her pocket. She didn't return it. Instead, she left the mansion under the pretense of running errands and went straight to a coffee shop in a quieter part of town, where an investigative journalist she had contacted the night before was waiting. His name was Daniel Hayes, a reporter known for peeling back the polished surfaces of the city's elite. When she slid the device across the table, he looked at it, then at her, and said, "You have no idea how dangerous this is." Over the next 2 weeks, the first articles began appearing. They hinted at offshore accounts, shell corporations, and questionable deals tied to Alexander Whitmore's name. Then came the second wave, full exposés with documents pulled directly from the encrypted files. Television anchors speculated, stock prices wavered, and political figures distanced themselves from him overnight. Alexander didn't respond to the press. He stayed behind the iron gates of his estate, silent but seething. Then, without warning, Regal was taken. Alexander's assistant informed the staff that the cat had been sent to a specialist for urgent medical care. Alana knew better. She searched for him, called every clinic she could think of, but the trail went cold. It seemed the final piece of Alexander's control had vanished with the animal he had guarded so fiercely. Weeks passed before the phone call came. Regal had been found wandering near a lakeside cabin, underweight but unharmed. The last image is quiet and unremarkable to anyone but her. Alana in a modest home, sunlight streaming through thin curtains, a cup of coffee in her hand as Regal pads across the room to curl beside her. He walks without hesitation now, each step light, sure, and free. And the truth, too, is no longer bound. She didn't just help him walk, she set the truth free. Because sometimes the most guarded secrets aren't hidden in safes or locked rooms. They're placed right in front of us, disguised as something too small, too ordinary to matter. Power has a way of hiding in plain sight, and it often takes someone with nothing to lose to bring it into the light. If you had discovered that collar, would you have spoken out or kept the secret? Would you have risked your safety to bring down a man like Alexander Whitmore, knowing what he was capable of? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. And if you thought this was shocking, wait until you hear about the hotel maid who exposed a royal scandal. A story where loyalty, deception, and survival collide in ways you won't believe. Make sure you subscribe for more true-life twists and investigations, because every story we tell uncovers just how much can hide in plain sight, and how one person's courage can change everything.